Report is in Daraqutni. So the sanad of this report is sahih, the sanad is sound. And scholars say that Hazrat Abdullah bin Mas'ud would never have said this on his own accord, except that definitely he would have heard Rasulullah say this. And what did he say? He who performs 4 rak'at after the Isha prayer. So 4 rak'at after the Isha prayer, before the witr, Allah will reward him as though he performed those 4 rak'at on Laylatul Qadr. So generally we are habitual of just reading 2 rak'at, sunnah mu'akkada and our witr, and then we finish. But Allah gave us the opportunity to do these 4. Subhanallah. And then witr we can do at that time, or the time of later on, which is the preferred time of tahajjud. Allah give us tawfiq, inshallah. Welcome to one and all. Allah accept us for His deen. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen, Sayyidina wa Habibina wa Muta'ina wa Mawlana Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Qala ta'ala, ba'da a'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, wa ma arsalnaka illa rahmatan lil alameen. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وكان النبي يبعث إلى قومه خاصة وبعثت إلى الناس عامة وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بعثت إلى الأحمر والأسود وكما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولقد أحسن القائل بلغ العلاء بكماله كشف الدجى بجماله حسنت جميع خصاله صلوا عليه وآله اللهم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وسندنا وحبيبنا ومطاعنا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. May Allah accept this discussion of ours, and may Allah make it beneficial, because it has lots to do with names and history. So I would love it to be somewhat interactive, otherwise it would become burdensome. Respected elders, beloved brothers, Deen reached us with great sacrifices, great challenges. Our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was sent to humanity in totality. When the Quran Kareem speaks about Anbiya alayhimus salam, Quran speaks with the greatest of detail about the da'wat of Anbiya. Different aspects of Anbiya alayhimus salam are mentioned in the Quran. But predominantly, when Allah speaks about any Nabi, the ultimate discussion of that Nabi alayhimus salam is how he gave da'wah to the people. Whether it's Salih alayhi salam, whether it's Hud alayhi salam, whether it's Nuh alayhi salam, how they invited the non-Muslims to Islam, how they invited the communities to get saved from Jahannam and go to Jannah. Quran follows this pattern in detail. We find this recurring throughout Allah's kalam. Nuh alayhi salam 43 times. We won't find much detail about his father's life or his father's names and his children's names and so forth. How he gave da'wah, what was the reaction, what was the repercussion, and what was the benefit of those who accepted the da'wah. This is recurring 43 times in 28 surahs. So do the calculation, the maths, equals to, you tell me, 71. And interestingly, chapter 71 is surah Nuh. So Quran Kareem is not haphazard. This is Allah's kalam. Everything is set perfectly, divine. This is Allah's kalam. Allah ka kalam hai. Even Surah Nuh, Allah tells us about Nuh alayhi salam's da'wah. But his da'wah and his dua, how it goes hand in hand. Allah is telling us this. Think about it. Is it a fairy tale? Why is Allah teaching us in detail how Hazrat Nuh gave da'wat? Why? There must be a reason. Is it that we must just make our own ibadat and run away home and worry about our own comfortable lives? Or is there another reason behind it? After Surah Nuh, chapter 72 is Surah Jinn. How the Jinn became Muslim was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving da'wah in Ta'if. He walked to Ta'if 60 miles. How he was treated there. Who he went with, Hazrat Zayd. How in Ta'if when he was ill-treated, and he resorted to a garden, a farm, and a foreigner brought him. You tell me, what was that foreigner's name? He wasn't a local, he didn't live there, he was a slave, but he brought Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam some grapes, and our beloved spoke to him so kindly. You tell me his name. Hazrat Addas, correct, mashallah. Hazrat Addas. He says, where are you from? Oh, Ninawa. You know, my brother is from there. So Addas is shocked. I'm a foreigner, and you know, at that time, this was Jahiliyyah, how you would treat an outsider and so forth. Islam brought a change to that system, that the Ummah was united. But at that time, and Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is treating him so lovingly, and he's telling him that my brother is from there. So he is thinking to himself, you are from Quraysh, from the elite family of Makkah, and you saying, your brother is from my town, please tell me how, I would like to know. He says, Yunus alayhi salam, he is Allah's Nabi from your town, Ninawa. He is my brother, he is Allah's Nabi, I am Allah's Nabi. This is how our beloved spoke to people. Can't you and I do the same? The man is filling petrol. Must we still be on our phones for those few minutes while we're filling petrol? Oh, thank him, the Bowser, and introduce Allah to him. Isn't that our duty in those 5 minutes we have with another human being? Not an animal, a human being. What about the man who's our customer, our colleague, our associate, our friend in life? So Rasulullah ﷺ is our colleague in our studies, our teacher in some university or school. Don't we think that that individual taught me the science of maths or science or whatever it is? There was a Jamaat not long ago in the UK, from UK in Newcastle. So I was sharing some Karguzaris with this Jamaat. So one of the senior Satis of the Jamaat is telling me that, you know what, I'm an accountant, a specialist in my field, and I was working for this Jewish company. And the owner was so kind to me that when I started, I didn't even have my license. I was, new to that company. And he actually would show me so much of kindness that on a Friday he would send his personal driver to drive me for Jumu'ah and wait for me and bring me back. After a few months of my work, he said to me, what car you prefer? What's your preference of the make of car? Because I want to give you that car as your company car. He says, this man was so kind to me. But after hearing, he says, I'm not working for that company anymore. I have my own company. He's a very, very elderly person. He says, I haven't fulfilled that man's right because I never introduced Allah to him. And he'll die and go to hell. I said, what you're saying is 100%. We are answerable. According to the Quran Sharif, we are answerable. Surah Jinn is about when Rasulullah ﷺ was returning, and then he was reciting Tahajjud, and he was reciting Quran, and Allah tells him about the jinn who heard him, and he was hurt because the Taif people ill-treated him. Open the book Fadailul A'mal, you have it. Do this ta'aleem in your home with the children. This is what will save our children from all the filth that's happening out there in the world. But the first incident there was how they ill-treated our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is returning, and the jinn heard him recite. Allah is showing him, Insan didn't want to listen to you, but don't worry, Allah is the giver of hidayah. Allah brought the jinn to hidayah on that occasion through the barakat of his sacrifice in Taif. There's another amazing incident where a man came to meet Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam later in his life. His name was, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him, how is your mother? He said, she's fine. Oh Allah's Nabi, she passed away. And she continued doing what you taught her. She was an elderly lady who showed kindness to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Taif. And she fed him porridge. She took him in, fed him porridge. He invited her to Islam. And he told her, Ma, don't ever worship Taghiya, the idol of the people of Taif. Oh Allah's Nabi, she died on the teachings you gave her. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so happy with that. So people didn't accept, but somebody, Allah brings to hidayah. So Surah Jinn is about that. Chapter 72. Chapter 73 and 74 in the Quran is about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's tahajjud and his da'wat. This was the Meccan stage. He was giving da'wat to everyone. There was one man who's linked to our discussion now, whose family Allah used to take Islam to the lands we are about to discuss. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him da'wat for 21 years. I want you to say his name, otherwise just now I will mention him to you. But you're welcome to say it if the answer comes to your mind. 21 years, our beloved gave him dawat, gave him dawat, gave him dawat. One day, the Sahabi says, I wasn't a Muslim. And Allah's Nabi saw myself, my wife, and my child. It was outside Makkah. So I said to my son's name was Muawiyah. Oh Muawiyah, get off the conveyance, let Muhammad ﷺ sit. And he sat on the conveyance next to me on my conveyance, and he invited me to Islam. He says, I remember the ayats of the Quran he recited to me. Surah Hamim Sajda. Hamim Tanzilum min ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kitabun fussilat ayatu Qur'anan Arabiyyan لقوم يعلمون بشيرا ونذيرا فأعرض أكثرهم فهم لا يسمعون. Allah's Nabi read this to him. Such a beautiful chapter of the Quran Kareem. There's many non-Muslims. Allah's Nabi used to recite these chapters of the Quran Kareem to them. This chapter starts, chapter 41 of the Quran. It starts with 10 qualities of the Quran Sharif. Kitabun fussilat ayatu. The previous chapter, Hamim al-Mu'min, chapter 40, is named after a man who wasn't a Nabi who gave da'wah. That's al-Mu'min. 3 pages of the Quran. A man who wasn't a Nabi gave da'wah. That's the chapter is named after him. Chapter 40. It starts with 10 qualities of Allah. Hamim tanzilum min ar-Rahman. Look how beautiful is the Quran Kareem set out. 10 qualities of Allah, this chapter starts with. The next chapter starts with 10 qualities of the Quran Sharif. And in this chapter, Hamim Fussilat, Allah brings 10 qualities of the Da'i. So Allah's Nabi invites this man to Islam. And years of effort, finally he came. He was none other than Hazrat Abu Sufyan. Sakhar was his name. Sakhar bin Harb. Allah's Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave him dawat. His wife's name was Hind. But Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't give up. We want to give a person dawat, 5 minutes, we think he's going to change. How many years of effort? And then, on the occasion of Fath Makkah, Makkah is being conquered. Abu Sufyan is finally met. Before that, Hazrat Muawiyah became Muslim before that. Not long before that. And then the other son, Yazid, radiyallahu anhu. One is the other Yazid who wasn't a Sahabi, but this was a Yazid who was a Sahabi. Hazrat Abu Sufyan's eldest son, a very great Sahabi. He took Islam into Sham, and Islam spread far and wide through that Sahabi, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam loved him. And Hazrat Abu Bakr gave him amazing hidayat. Study in the history books. The hidayat Hazrat Abu Bakr gave him when sending him as the Amir in the path of Allah. Allah's Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam patiently worked on him. Now Fath Makkah is being conquered. And Abu Sufyan comes there. So Hazrat Abbas sees him. Who's Hazrat Abbas? You tell me. The uncle of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He sees Abu Sufyan. He's so happy. He wants Abu Sufyan to get hidayat. So he brings him to meet Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Hazrat Umar sees him in that. Hazrat Umar wants to finish off Abu Sufyan. Because Hazrat Umar is looking at how much Allah's Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went through. So Hazrat Abbas says, you wait, I am Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's uncle, and you don't do anything. And Hazrat Umar was very upset that how much of harm was caused upon the deen. So Hazrat Abbas says, because he's not of your family. Hazrat Umar says, see, you're getting it wrong. When you became Muslim, it brought more joy to me than even if my father, if he were to become Muslim. This was Hazrat Umar's level of Iman. And very similar was Hazrat Abu Bakr, because not long thereafter, right by the Kaaba Sharif, Hazrat Abu Bakr brought his father. Look at Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar's level. Hazrat Abu Bakr brings his aged father. He would have probably been 100 at the time. What was his name? Hazrat Abu Bakr's father. Abu Quhafa, mashallah. Uthman, Abu Quhafa. Hazrat Abu Bakr brings his aged father to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Allah's Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gets up in respect for Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And he's teaching the Ummah respect also for the elderly. Oh Abu Bakr, why didn't you take me to him? Look at Hazrat Abu Bakr's adab. Oh Allah's Nabi, never. My father has to come to you. You are Allah's Nabi. What was Hazrat Abu Bakr's name? The greatest of this ummah, Hazrat Abu Bakr. What was his name? Abdullah. Abdullah bin Uthman, the greatest of this ummah. The father of Bakr. Bakr means a young, vibrant camel. And Bakr means to be quick and fast and to be first. Bukra means early tomorrow morning. Bikr means your first wife. And bikr means a virgin. And bikr means your first child. Bakura means the first part of the juice. So this word means to be first. And Abu Bakr was the first. The first in the masjid was Hazrat Abu Bakr. The first to unite between people was Hazrat Abu Bakr. The first to visit the sick was Hazrat Abu Bakr. The first to give da'wat was Hazrat Abu Bakr. The first to embrace was Hazrat Abu Bakr, Islam, radiyallahu anhu. The first to give charity was Hazrat Abu Bakr. The first to make salam. You and I think, oh, we're very senior, very, very great. Others must come greet us. Hazrat Abu Bakr was the first. Sahaba say you could never beat Hazrat Abu Bakr in making salam. From far he would come and see us and make salam to us. Hazrat Abu Bakr, the first to ask for maaf. The first to apologize. Wallah, see in the ahadith how Hazrat Abu Bakr, in how many incidents he would go and say, make me maaf, my brothers, forgive me, did I upset you? Hazrat Abu Bakr, even during his khilafah, between him and Hazrat Umar, when Hazrat Umar opposed him regarding something, then the two came to Hazrat Abu Bakr. Are you the Amir or is Umar the Amir? He says, actually he's the Amir. Hazrat Abu Bakr knew how to bring people together. He didn't get upset that, Umar, how can you oppose me when I gave them the docket and I gave them the title deed of that property, I just wanted you to sign. He says, no, Umar, I told you, you better than me. Why you put me forward? This was Hazrat Abu Bakr. So Hazrat Abu Sufyan became such a Muslim, subhanallah, and he gave his life for Allah's deen. And then his son Hazrat Muawiyah, radiyallahu anhum, and they come from the family of Hazrat Uthman bin Affan radiyallahu anhu. And they're known as the Banu Umayyah. Such an amazing family. And all the Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu anhum. But we're discussing how Islam reached these countries. So it won't be fair to discuss that without mentioning who was the means. When Allah gave Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu that high position of Khilafah, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam alluded to it. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam referred to it when he was making khidmah of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and pouring the water of wudu. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked at him and said, "Oh Muawiyah, when Allah gives you rule with justice." He says, from that time I knew Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam indicated that Allah is going to give me this big responsibility. When Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu became the Khalifa, where Islam was taken far, far in the four corners of the world. Then the offspring of Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. But remember, after Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, in our history, you'll find good and you'll find bad. After Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu anhum, we'll find good qualities, we'll find bad qualities. We learn from the good and we learn how not to be like the bad. Like Luqman Hakim, chapter 32 in the Quran. The preferred view was he was not a Nabi and he was African. And subhanallah, in our deen, there's lots to do with African. There was a woman who spent more time with our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam than any other human being in history. I asked the students earlier, I told them to bring the answer for me. I don't know if you did that research. That woman who spent more time with our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam than any other human being in history. She was from Africa. You can tell me, who was she? Ji? Hazrat Baraka Ummu Ayman. So Africa has lots to do. Hazrat Luqman Hakim was Africa. Allah quotes him in the Quran due to his wisdom. And he was asked, how you became so wise? He says, when I see good, I learn from that. And I want to be like that. And when I see something wrong, I abstain. And I learn how not to be like that. And we learn this in history. And when we research history, we're going to see everything. We learn how to be and how not to be. Then, in the time of the Banu Umayyah, came among them was great rulers like Walid bin Abdul Malik. In the time of Walid, now what happened was, Islam reached in Hazrat Uthman's time. Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu's time, Islam reached Egypt. From Egypt, Islam was going to enter into North Africa. Hazrat Umar wrote a letter to the Sahaba, hold on. Because Islam had entered Persia. Islam had entered many of the Roman territories. Islam was in Egypt already. Hazrat Amr bin As was the governor of Egypt. He said, stop at Africa. Hazrat Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu, Allah used him and took this work from him. He sent his own brother, Abdullah bin Sa'ad bin Abi Sarh. But how is he the brother? Uthman bin Affan and Abdullah bin Sa'ad, they were brothers. They had the same mother, Arwa binti Qurayz. So he sent his brother as the commander to make this sacrifice. And he contributed to these men, this army, from his own pocket. Not just from the Baytul Mal, but from his own pocket. And he sent Islam into Africa, North Africa. And subhanallah, very, very great people joined this expedition. Among them were Sahaba, like the four great Abdullahs, Abdullah bin Abbas, Abdullah bin Umar, Abdullah bin Amr bin As, and very, very great Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, Abdullah bin Zubayr, radiyallahu anhu, Uqba bin Nafi', he was a relative of Amr bin As. He remained in Africa after these areas were conquered, teaching deen for a lengthy period of time. Over 40 years he remained there, just teaching Allah's deen. And when there was differences, there was that time of fitna, then what happened was the spread of Islam stopped. But the Sahaba carried on teaching deen in those areas that they were in, like Uqba bin Nafi', he remained teaching deen in Africa. Then, during the reign of Hazrat Muawiyah, radiyallahu anhu, the Ummah was united. Hazrat Muawiyah, radiyallahu anhu, said that there's many Sahaba greater than me, but in rule and in the spread of Islam, Allah took great work from me, and I am more beneficial for you. This was the statement of Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. And not only Hazrat Muawiyah, the Sahaba used to say, which Sahaba? Hazrat Umar's son. I have never seen a better ruler than Hazrat Muawiyah. Hazrat Umar's son said this. I have never seen a better ruler than Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. Ma ra'aytu akthara siyadatan min Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. Hazrat Abdullah bin Zubayr radiyallahu anhu said that I wish Hazrat Muawiyah ruled forever. As long as there's this mountain standing, I wish Hazrat Muawiyah's rule carried on. Madama fi hadha al-jabali hajar. Jabal Abi Qubays he was looking at. Look at the policy of Hazrat Muawiyah. Look at his akhlaq. One day in Medina Munawwara, the farm of Abdullah bin Zubayr radiyallahu anhu was next to the farm of Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. And Hazrat Muawiyah ruled from Damascus. So in this farm, some of his servants were trespassing into the farm of Abdullah bin Zubayr radiyallahu anhu. So Abdullah bin Zubayr radiyallahu anhu was upset, and he sent a letter notifying Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. And in this there was somewhat reprimand. So the man reading the letter was Yazid, who became upset. So Hazrat Muawiyah says, this is not how you deal with it. You don't get upset. And he responded to the letter saying, oh, the helper of Rasulullah, oh, the son of the helper of Rasulullah. Because Hazrat Abdullah bin Zubayr's father was Hawari. So he refers to him with that respect. And he says, forgive me for what my people have done by trespassing into your farm. My entire farm and all its components are a gift from me to you. This was his akhlaq, and this was his ikram, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. During his time, Islam reached far and wide. Many, many regions, many, many areas. Now we were in this North African region. Let's remember Uqba bin Nafi'. Now Uqba bin Nafi', he was in North Africa. And as he took Islam further, he was striving for Allah's deen. Many, many people embraced Islam. There were many battles against the Romans. Then, Hazrat Uqba bin Nafi' was removed. And the man who was appointed was Abul Muhajir Dinar, a great Sahabi student. Maslama bin Mukhallad was a great Sahabi, a great scholar of the Quran. His student was, his Mawla was Abul Muhajir Dinar. Abul Muhajir was the Amir. So Abul Muhajir brought many people into Islam. Then few years later, Abul Muhajir was deposed and Uqba bin Nafi' was reinstated. This is in North Africa, just before the incidents of Spain, right? This is near Tunisia and Qayrouan, before we get to Spain. In this now, what happens there is the new Muslims, Uqba bin Nafi' was very strict with them, radiyallahu anhu. So Abul Muhajir told him that if you're going to be strict with them, they're going to revolt. They're not ready for this yet. So there was one man whose name was Qusayla bin Lahzam. He just embraced Islam and he was a leader. Now Abul Muhajir knew how to deal with him. That you have to make his ikram, and a time will come where he'll become so sincere. But Uqba bin Nafi' radiyallahu anhu felt no. He should be sincere, and if he can't take rigorous treatment, he must go. So he wanted to make his tarbiyat. So this happened. Where Uqba bin Nafi' appointed him to skin the animals. And because he was a chief of his community, he couldn't bear this. And he ran away and he became murtad. Thereafter, later on, Hazrat Uqba bin Nafi' conquered and took Islam into new areas. And as he was returning, remember the year, it was 63, he gave amazing advices. Among the advices he gave before he passed away, number one, he said, don't let anything keep you away from Quran and Sunnah. These were the advices. He gave 3 advices before he passed away. Uqba bin Nafi'. Don't let anything keep you away from Quran and Sunnah. Whatever shi'r or poetry, nothing should keep us away from Quran and Sunnah. And we have to be careful. There's people today who say, it's only Quran. The hadith is sahih. Rasulullah ﷺ said, this hadith is in Sunan ibn Majah, with a sound chain. Allah's Nabi said, ﷺ, before judgment day, they will come, a people, who's sitting on his special chair, arikatihi. He'll be reclining on his big chair. And they will come to him and tell him about me and my sunnah. And he would respond and say, Aqra'u Qur'anan. I only read Qur'an. I'm not interested in the hadith and the sunnah. Allah's Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam forewarned this. And he said that, remember, what I said is also part of what comes from Allah. Meaning the Qur'an is the explanation of the hadith. I have a friend of mine who embraced Islam 7 years ago. He was a priest. He saw an amazing dream before Allah Ta'ala brought him to Islam. So he's telling me he was doing some dawah on the street and some brothers come to him and says, no, what do you say? It's only the Qur'an. So he asked that brother. He's a revert, he's elderly, he's 70 years old. You must hear his story sometime, how he became Muslim, subhanallah. And he works on our Ethiopian community. Allahu Akbar. Allah Ta'ala bless him for that. He's sitting with us, alhamdulillah. He's asking the brother, then how do you perform salah? How do you perform salah if you're only going to accept the Quran Sharif? The details and the explanation of the Quran is in the ahadith and the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So number one, Uqba bin Nafi' said, don't let anything keep you away from Quran and sunnah. Number two, he said, never take debts to buy new things. Wear old and clean, but never take debts. وَلَوْ لَبِسْتُمُ الْعَبَى. Even though you have to wear your old garments, but never take debts. Because debts are a disgrace in the day and a grief by night. And number three, he said, make sure you take advice from ulama who don't look for loopholes. Take advice from ulama who will tell you what is right and truth, and don't look for loopholes. These were his 3 advices. And then he plunged his horse into the Atlantic and he cried. And he said, Ya Allah, I wish I could cross this ocean and strive and take your deen to every region on this earth and every island, so every person can recognize you. This was their mission, the mission of Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. And it was in the year 63. He was returning, and it was the same Qusayla who saw that he sent his men, because he was returning slowly. He wanted to visit few other areas, and he was with but a few men. Himself and Abul Muhajir together, Qusayla revolted against them and attacked them whilst they were unawares, and he killed them, and they became shaheed in the year 63 Hijri. But Islam doesn't stop. They carried on. Islam and the deen carried on. Hassan bin Nu'man Ghassani. And then comes another amazing Amir by the name of Musa bin Nusayr. Now Musa bin Nusayr was sent there by Walid bin Abdul Malik. All this was happening in the time of Walid. Who are they? The Banu Umayyah. Allah says in the Quran Kareem, لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. Allah wants to make deen apparent. And Allah made this happen under this amazing family. When Musa bin Nusayr was sent, now there was an area, Sibta. This was in the borders of Tunisia. There, a Christian ruler ruled. Julian was his name. And he came to meet Musa bin Nusayr, saying, help me, because my people are living in Spain and people are suffering. People are facing injustices. And we see the way Muslims live and Muslims rule. Justice, fairness, equality. And the former ruler, who was his relative, was overthrown by a tyrannical ruler. So he says, would you all help me? He says, I even have the ships to send you through. And it was that Christian, Julian, who actually sent Musa bin Nusayr's men, Tarif bin Malik first and Tariq bin Ziyad second, in the year 92 and 93 Hijri, where Islam entered Spain and Islam started spreading in Spain from the year 92, 93 Hijri. But then Islam started spreading, more and more people started learning about Islam. When Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah became the ruler, he then sent many ulama into North Africa and even then into Spain to make sure that the aqidah of the believers are preserved. That was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah's efforts. And then after, there was an amazing ruler called Hisham bin Abdul Malik. Now all these rulers were the sons of Abdul Malik. Allah took great work from them. Hisham bin Abdul Malik. He ruled from 105 Hijri, 105 to 125. 20 years of amazing rule. During Hisham's rule, he had a brother, Maslama bin Abdul Malik. Maslama saw an amazing dream. Maslama was a man who strove in Allah's way, and he was equated to one who followed Hazrat Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu. He took Islam far and wide. He was never at home. He was striving in Allah's way. He was always at the borders of Constantinople, taking Islam to the center of Roman territory. He sieged Constantinople on so many occasions. He built the first masjid in Constantinople. Who? Maslama bin Abdul Malik. He saw this amazing dream that Banu Umayyah will collapse in the east, but Allah will then give them light and strength in the west. So he mentioned this to his brother Hisham. But Hisham was shocked. But how can you think that? Allah has given us such a flourishing state, such an amazing khilafah, that everything is being taken care of so well. This is not possible. And then one day he said to his brother was the Khalifa, he says, in this dream, who's this little boy? There was a little child there. His name was Abdul Rahman bin Muawiyah bin Hisham. Hisham's grandson. He says, no, this is my grandson. He says, I saw him in the dream that Allah will use him to bring it alive in the west. Hisham still found it very hard to believe. But then when he saw that his nephew, who was designated the next ruler after him, who was filled with sins and opulence and gunas and alcohol, this was not the normal rulers, but this happened to his nephew. So he called his nephew and advised him. He says, why do you do this? You know you're going to be the ruler after me. Why don't you come near me and learn from your uncle? Sit with me in the khilafah. Let's learn how to preserve deen, how to help the people, how to handle situations. His nephew told him, I'm not interested. I have my own way. I'm just waiting for you to die, and I'll run it the way I want to run it. And then he realized probably what his brother was telling him had to be true. Anyway, he called that grandchild of his, and he would train him that when Allah uses you in the West, this is how you have to run the affairs of the Khilafah. And he taught him and trained him. And finally, this young man was under 20, was 19, in the year 132, where the Banu Umayyah fell. And the Banu al-Abbas was given an opportunity. Another family ruled. They come from the offspring of Hazrat Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But then they knew the power of Banu Umayyah, and this happens to kingdom. They wanted to end Banu Umayyah totally. Otherwise they were so powerful, they could come up again and there could be an uprising and internal turmoil and revolt. So they massacred and ended all of them. This young man was too wise. He didn't accept any of the invites and didn't fall into any trap, and he ran for his life. He ran with one brother of his, Abdul Rahman, and his brother's name was Hisham, like his grandfather. And they're running. And the Abbasids are hunting them down. Ibn al-Athir rahimahullah mentions this, he gives a recount of this detailed journey in his book, Al-Kamil, which towns he goes through and how they almost found him and what happened in Palestine. And then he went via Egypt, and then how they almost found him in a haystack. How when he entered the Euphrates and he was swimming through with his brothers, and the Abbasid soldiers were hunting him down and reached the shore. And they call him back, and he refused to return. And then his younger brother got tired, And he tells his brother as they're swimming across, don't go back. But his brother didn't listen, he was tired. And he says, no, they give me amnesty. And his brother Hisham returns, and Abdul Rahman carried on. And as he went further, they told him, if you don't come back, we're going to kill your brother. But he knew they were still going to do that either way. They wanted him. And Allah guided him, he never went back. But in front of him, they killed his brother. And that hurt him very, very much and very, very deeply. And he carried on. And how he got right to North Africa. And from there, he had a companion with him, one friend. It was his freed slave, Badr. He was a Roman slave who embraced Islam, who was with him and very, very loyal. He sent him into Spain to tell them, because Spain now was also internally a lot of politics now, because the Banu Umayyah are falling. And this is still far from the east. Who's going to rule? And he went to notify them. There's a lot of details in the history, but this is just a little bit of the crux. He went to notify them that this is the offspring of the Banu Umayyah. And they said, bring him. And Abdul Rahman came into Spain and he fell into sajda. And he was known as Abdul Rahman ad-Dakhil. And he made Spain a different place. He ruled an amazing rule, a lengthy rule. He built masajid. He brought the people together. And how he ended off fitan. He was very, very brave. He arranged for one date palm tree that he planted next to his palace. And this tree stands up till today. And he used to look at this tree and sit and make muraqabah there and think about his own condition. He would say, I'm a loner like this tree. He said, tabaddat. He says, this tree is alone in this far off land. And its similitude is like me. Far from my homeland, far from my family. And he used to cry and think of his family. But Allah used him to make a difference. And then him and his sons ruled thereafter. For many, many years, the Banu Umayyah ruled. But like a dynasty starts, a time happens when deen comes out of the life, the dynasty comes to an end. This is the system. Allah gives opportunity of rule. When deen comes out, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it away. So few centuries later, deen started coming out of the lives. It was in the 4th century after Hijrah, where the Banu Umayyah started becoming weak. And when they started becoming weak, then smaller kings are coming about in Spain. There were ulama, among the great ulama at that time, Abul Walid Baji rahimahullah. He made gush for 30 years, going from masjid to masjid, telling the Muslims, we have to come back to deen, otherwise there'll be trouble. Otherwise we'll have nothing. Otherwise we'll lose what we have. Abul Walid Baji rahimahullah. Another very, very great scholar at the time was Mundhir bin Sa'id bin Luti rahimahullah. But Abul Walid Baji is known that he never took anything. He taught Allah's deen and he used to work very hard. He had clusters in his hands and he used to eat from his own hard labor. But he strove for 30 years going from masjid to masjid, bringing the ummah together, saying, if we don't come together, we'll lose the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout that 4th century. Next to Spain, on the other side of the sea, was an area by Mauritania. Marrakesh, Morocco and Mauritania. There was a Muslim community. But because they didn't have ulama to teach them, and there was no effort of iman, deen had died in them. So there was one old man who had fikr. And one man can make a difference. Remember his name, Yahya Lamtuni. He was crying, Allah, what's happening to the people? Halal, haram, everything is totally neglected. Halal, haram, no differentiation, no salah, no connection to masjid. He went for Hajj. This was in the 4th century. In the 5th century, so this is from the years 430 Hijri, 5th century. He went for Hajj. He spoke to the ulama, please send me people, like how we'll request the markaz, send the jamaat here to make an effort. He went to make a request from Hajj, please send me ulama. Then he went to North Africa, he had a fikr. One alim came with him, Sheikh Abdullah bin Yasin. And this is on the other side of Spain, right? Near Marrakesh. And this alim started working on these communities, Sanhaja and Lamtuna. And when they're making an effort, just now you'll realize why I'm mentioning this incident. And he's working on them. But the people got very upset. Why? Because of tribalism, racism. That you from another tribe, you want to come and teach us? This is such a deadly disease. This was the disease that Rasulullah ﷺ strove to eradicate. That don't look at color, don't look at nationality, love one another. They telling this alim, you go back to where you came from. He says, I only want good for you. They said, we'll show you. And he carried on with perseverance teaching these people. And then they tried to murder him. They set his house alight while he was asleep. Allah saved him. He got up in the nick of time and he ran. Then they chased him and he ran into the desert. He ran and ran. And far in the desert he fell and he cried. He fell into sajda and he says, Allah, you guide me. Do I return home, which I would love to do, and leave these people? Or do I go back? What will make you happy? And Allah teaches in the Quran the incident of Hazrat Yunus alayhi salam, and the incidents of the Anbiya alayhi salam, how they never gave up. So he went back to the people. He announced to them that I know you all don't want me, but I want you. So if you don't want me in the town, who of you will join me? And he makes their tashkeel. From the entire community, 5 get ready. He goes with them and they pitch their tent in the jungle. And he starts teaching them. And he starts teaching them Iman, Yaqeen, Deen. 5 become 10, 10 become 20, 20 become 100. One can make a difference. 100 become 1,000. They became 10 to 12,000. And how they strove for Allah's Deen. And any area they went to, they brought alive Deen. They then made their capital Murrakish. They actually traveled there. There was nothing. It was an area, an infestation of highway robbery and hijacking. And that's what Murrakish means. When translated in Arabic, Morocco, it means Mur Sari'an. Travel here, hastening your pace. Otherwise you'll be hijacked. Mur Sari'an. And look at the effort of Deen brought such a change in that area. That became their capital. And everyone came onto Deen and equality and justice. There was so much of justice that in that area every house looked the same. There was so much of love. There was so much of harmony. Until that alim then, when he passed away, Yahya then later on passed away. Then there was another ruler, Abu Bakr bin Umar. You can't forget his name because his name has the 2 greatest Sahaba in his name. Abu Bakr bin Umar al-Lamtuni. He was then the next ruler. They used to call him Amirul Muslimin. Not Amirul Mu'mineen was the Khalifa Abbasid because the Ummah was united. So Amirul Muslimin, meaning the Amir of that community, the Amir of his people, the Murabitin. This Amir, he was such an amazing person. He had fikr. He was righteous. He says, we have deen here. What about Africa? This is 1,000 years ago. 450 Hijri. So he made mashura with his wife, Zainab al-Nafzawiyah, and then he made mashura with his cousin. His cousin's name you should remember and you should know. Have you heard of his cousin? Yusuf. Have you heard the name Yusuf ibn Tashafin? Amazing person in history. So Abu Bakr bin Umar al-Lamtuni says to Yusuf, Yusuf, you become the Amir here. Let me go to the people who never received the message of Allah's Deen. Look how they thought. And he goes into West Africa. And he strives and he teaches and he invites people to Allah. For years, these were not people who gave up and say, okay, we spent a little while. Allah forgive us when our elders make our tashkil for a short period also we're not prepared to go. How will we give our life one day when we can't go for a short period? We can't even sacrifice the comfort of our home for a few days. Sleep in the masjid for 3-4 days. Go to the masjid for 1 month, for 40 days. Spend that time in that environment preparing for our qabr. How we'll be lonely in that grave. Spending that time in the masjid with takbira ula, sitting in the ta'aleem, correcting our surahs, learning deen, bringing one person to the masjid. This is to prepare our akhirah. If we can't make this little sacrifice, how will we do what they did someday? It's easy to make excuses. Oh no. This man goes in from 450 Hijri to 465. How long is that? 15 years. He brought millions of people to Islam. 15 years later when he returns, to his capital, Yusuf comes to welcome him and wonders, is he coming back to lead us again? He says, no, I'm not here for position. I just come to visit you to make sure that your deen is up to date and preserved and protected. I must go back to the people who need me more. I don't want this position. You doing well, you carry on. This is that level. But then he makes such a sacrifice that becomes very difficult for you and I to even understand and even quote. He requests his wife. And subhanallah, where would he have learned this? That's why anything you see amazing in history stems from the barakat of Sahaba Kiram radiallahu anhu. The Sahabi who took Islam into Persia, Al-Muthanna bin Haritha al-Shaybani, as he was leaving this world, he calls his wife. He says to his wife, Hazrat Umar has sent Hazrat Sa'ad. Oh my wife, I want you to wed Hazrat Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. She cried that why is my husband telling me this? But you know why he was telling her that? Because she knew everything about Persia like him, how they strove for years in Allah's way. And if she's wedded to the next Amir and commander, that will be a benefit to Allah's deen. He jeopardizes, even though he loved his wife, as clear in history, he jeopardizes his possibility of being with her in Jannah, because then she'll be given the choice in Akhirah for the benefit of Allah's deen. This is what they looked at. Sahaba only looked at Allah's deen. Ya Abu Bakr bin Umar says to his wife, that you were the wife of such an Amir. Now I'm a simple man, I'm a da'i. And subhanallah, the quality of a da'i is so simple, so beautiful. That's why Allah loves the da'i so much. That's why the da'i's ranking before Allah is so great. How many people will say this to the da'i and say that to the da'i, but he has to carry on and carry on and not retaliate and not respond and still love that person and still love that person's children and still teach that person's children and take them in the path of Allah and take them out of the dens of vice and drugs and wrong and still show them love and forget about that. A da'i only can have that capacity. Subhanallah. Because we learned that from the Sahabar radiallahu anhu. In this, respected elders, beloved brothers, Hazrat Abu Bakr bin Umar al-Lamtuni requests his wife that she come out of his nikah, and after her iddah, she wed Yusuf ibn Tashafin. And he then goes back into Africa. And he carries on striving in Allah's way. And this was so amazing, showing that he could not fulfill her huquq. Why must he keep her tied? This is an amazing lesson. And he carried on. For 400 until the year 480 Hijri, where he was shaheed. He was shot by a poisonous arrow because the Sangomas and so forth couldn't bear the way Islam was spreading. But they don't realize that is victory for a believer, to die in the path of Allah. For Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the pious righteous people of the pious predecessors, for them to die at home was a shame. Sahaba actually used to feel sorry for somebody if he passed away at home. It wasn't belittling him. They used to feel sorry for him. Oh, they really felt it. Oh, he passed away at home. We feel sorry for him. لَكِنَّ الْبَائِسَ سَعْدُ بْنُ خَوْلَةٍ. Sahaba loved to die far in the path of Allah. And there were those Sahaba who even were killed while they were giving da'wah. Who can give me a few examples? You know, we mentioned Ta'if. The Sahabi who took Islam into Ta'if thereafter was Urwa bin Mas'ud Thaqafi. He was giving da'wah in Ta'if and he was killed. And he made shukr. Then the people of Ta'if are asking him, we're going to take revenge for you. He says, no. I want you to bury me with the shuhada of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And I want you to prepare a Jamaat, a delegation. This is in Abu Dawud Sharif. And I want you to go to Medina Munawwara and meet Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and embrace Islam and bring Islam back to our people. This is an honor for me. I don't want you to fight and take revenge. Hazrat Urwa bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Another Sahabi killed while he was giving da'wat. You know Hazrat Anas? Hazrat Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu's uncle. Haram bin Milhan. He was giving, 70 Sahaba was sent to Najd to give da'wat and to teach Allah's deen. A request came from that area. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent his students from Ashab al-Suffa, 70 of them. And they all were killed. But the first to be killed was the man who was giving da'wat to the leader of that community. And while he was giving da'wat, that man gets his guard to pierce and kill this Sahabi from behind his back. He penetrates his spear through the Sahabi's back, and it penetrates through his chest, squirting out blood. And the Sahabi raises his hand filled in blood, making shukr to Allah. That Allah, fuztu wa rabbil Kaaba, I have triumphed, I have won by the qasam of Allah, the Lord of the Kaaba. That assassinator, the assassin was shocked. He went to the Sahaba. He says, this man, I killed him. And this is what he said. What does this mean? What is this deen? He was so inspired that brought him to Islam. This was what Sahaba loved, to strive for Allah's deen. The same family, Haram bin Milhan, he had a sister. This is in Sahih Bukhari. He had a sister. His sister's name was Haram. She wasn't his mother, but she was the elder sister, so she cared for him. So Haram and Haram were brother and sister. Her name was Ghumaysa. The other sister's name was Rumaysa. She was the sister who used to accumulate the amazing perspiration of Janabi Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We all learned that incident where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would rest and she would accumulate it. And Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her, what are you doing with this? She said, oh Allah's Nabi, this is the best of perfume. This is for me and my family. We use it on great occasions. Hazrat Rumaysa. This is Hazrat Haram Ghumaysa. Hazrat Haram's son, his name was Abu Ubay. He was the last Sahabi to pass away in Palestine. Hazrat Haram's son. Hazrat Sulaim, Rumaysa's son, was who? Sahabi used to make Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's khidmah. Very famous. Young Sahabi. Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu. The last Sahabi to pass away in Basra. So Haram was at home. This is in Sahih Bukhari. That Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was resting. And when he awakened, he smiled. So she asked him, oh Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you're so happy, you're smiling? What makes you smile? You know what Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said? I saw my ummah traversing with my deen and crossing the oceans. Kal muluki alal asirra, like kings on thrones. Those who took Allah's deen across the ocean for Allah's sake to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this hadith looked like kings on thrones. This is how special is that person who's taking Allah's deen and striving for Allah's deen. What was the reaction of Hazrat Haram? Sahaba were not accustomed to water. So sometimes our reaction is, oh, what is this? Oh, not me. Look at Sahaba's temperament and mizaj. She says, oh Allah's Nabi, make dua. I am also among them. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Anti minhum, you are from them. I saw you there. You are from them. And she was among the first Sahaba to take Allah's deen across the ocean. And she went with her husband, Hazrat Ubadah bin Samit, an amazing Sahabi. Also remember, he was black skinned. How beautiful is the black color, mashallah. Ubadah bin Samit. He was that Sahabi, when he was giving dawat to the king of Egypt, the king got scared. So he said to the other Sahaba, the Jamaat of Sahaba were 10. Muqawqis, the king of Alexandria. He's telling them, why are you all making a black man speak to me? So the Sahaba are saying, he is our Amir. So the king is telling them, how can you all make a black man yours Amir? So the Sahaba say to him that to us Muslims, all colors are equal. La yunkaru sawadu fina. So Hazrat Ubadah bin Samit was her husband. Very tall, big Sahabi, 10 arms length was his, 10 handspans was his height. He's buried right there by Masjid al-Aqsa, Hazrat Ubadah bin Samit. He went in Allah's way with his wife, and when they arrived there, she fell off the horse and she became shaheed when they got off at the shore at Cyprus. Back to this, so how Sahaba strove and crossed and traversed the ocean for Allah's sake. So here we were discussing Yusuf ibn Tashafin, who took over after who? Abu Bakr bin Umar al-Lamtuni, isn't it? Because he went into West Africa, Burkina Faso, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, where in those countries that are Muslim up till today due to their efforts. I remember not long ago, we were returning from Egypt, and at the airport we were talking to some brothers, And actually it was so sad when we went to Egypt also, because we went to the markaz and asked the elders, send jamaats to Egypt, because there's no jamaats and they don't even allow jamaats, and jamaats are so concealed, and internally people are looking for jamaats, and there's no more maktabs. This is not long ago in Egypt, just during the COVID time. No maktabs. And Allahu Akbar. But then you find missionaries working very, very hard. As we were returning, we met these people from West Africa. So we're telling them, you know, how Islam entered there. One was a missionary, priest, missionary. He was coming to South Africa to do lectures. So then we were telling him about Islam, and I was showing him this one book that I'll give you if you want to share Islam with some Christians. Hidden Treasures in the Bible. It's a nice strategy written by our ulama. Anyway, I was showing him this. And in that, you know, it's shocking. He was misunderstanding. He says, no, actually, Muslims came there and confused us. So I'm telling them, no, the Crusaders and the Christians came there and confused you. Islam is in West Africa 1,000 years ago. So how the Christians, you know, what they did in India, they tried to do the same thing there in Africa for the last centuries. How they confused the people. Here now, Yusuf ibn Tashafin was ruling in Morocco. And what's happening now in Spain? The Umayyad rule fell. So there were smaller kingdoms in each area. Seville, they call it Seville, Cordoba, Tulaytila, Madrid, and all these areas. Now, when the effort of deen comes out, Muslims don't trust each other and don't have love for each other. So the Crusaders and the Christians were trying to make their way forward. So sadly, one Muslim ruler will pay tribute to the Christian to protect him against his own Muslim brother. This was the state. The Christians were using that money to actually devour the Muslim lands again, because they wanted to take Spain. There was one amazing Muslim ruler who was the ruler of Seville. It's spelled as Seville, they pronounce it Seville. So this man's name was Al-Mu'tamid ibn Abbad. So he's telling his son, the only people who will help us are the Muslims in Morocco. So some people in his mashura are telling him, but why them? What if they come and take our lands? He says, rather they are Muslim. We rather be shepherds under them than tend to the pigs of the Crusaders. This was the answer Mu'tamid responded. And the Crusaders were sieging this area, Seville. So Alfonso was his name. He was mocking Al-Mu'tamid. He writes to him. He says, the flies outside your city is really disturbing me. Can you send me some fans? So Mu'tamid's response was, I'm bringing fans for you with special skins from Murrakesh, meaning the Murabitin. They're coming for you. And then Alfonso started getting worried because he heard about the religiosity and the deendari of those people. When the letter came to Yusuf ibn Tashafin, he made dua. He says, Allah, if there's khair for me to go there, help me. He got his men ready. They embarked. They took their camels and they went on to boarded the ships, and the water started becoming wild. Then he made dua again. He says, Allah, if there's khair in us going there, then you make the water calm and you take us through. Otherwise you don't let us go. If our intention is anything else but your pleasure. And immediately the water settled and became calm, and they crossed. And all the Muslims of Spain came out welcoming them. This is the years 479 Hijri. This is 479 Hijri. But how will you calculate the Gregorian calendar? Add approximately 600 years. Then you'll get the solar calendar. So 479 Hijri. And the Muslims of Spain are happy that their brothers came to help them. And alhamdulillah, a very famous battle took place on a ground called Zallaqa against the huge army of the Crusaders. And the Muslims were united. And alhamdulillah, this expedition protected Islam for another few centuries. The efforts of Yusuf ibn Tashafin. But what happened here was, Yusuf at the end, he took all the booty and he gave it to the Muslim rulers of Spain. He says, I didn't come here for booty, but I don't want you all to fight internally. This was his request. He says, don't do that. And then he went back. But later on, a few years later, when the rulers, because of love of this world, and some of the kings, when they invited Yusuf ibn Tashafin to eat. He even refused to eat in their homes because they were eating in golden utensils. See, when deen comes out of the life. But he made effort on them. But then few years later, when they were still paying tribute to the Christians thereafter, instead of uniting with each other, then Yusuf ibn Tashafin came in, and he then, like he attacked the Crusaders to defend Islam and the lands of Islam, he also attacked these kings called Mulukut Tawaif, the kings of the different sects. And then there was a united Muslim rule of Spain by Yusuf ibn Tashafin. So what he did in Spain was very, very similar to what another Yusuf did in Palestine. Who heard of the other Yusuf? Have you heard of the other Yusuf? That was in the year 588. This was 480. That was 580. That was also Yusuf. How he protected the lands of Islam in Palestine and Sham. He brought back Palestine to the Muslim rule. Who was he? Yusuf. Salahuddin. Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah's name was Yusuf. Yusuf Salahuddin and Yusuf ibn Tashafin. Both were Yusuf, but Yusuf Salahuddin is known. Yusuf ibn Ayyub he was. And this was Yusuf ibn Tashafin. Salahuddin Ayyubi's teacher was who? Inshallah, last few discussions we'll have, so just pay a little bit of attention, inshallah. Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah's teacher was who? Nuruddin Zingi. Nuruddin's name was Mahmud. Inshallah, sometime Allah give us tawfiq. We'll just discuss Nuruddin and how Allah Ta'ala used them to preserve Islam in the East. But this was Yusuf bin Tashafin. So then, alhamdulillah, Islam was preserved in Spain. But this carried on for years until when deen becomes weak in the lives, then we lose rule. And let's fast forward because we don't have much time. Until the end, when it happened that not much of Spain was left because Muslims were disunited. Only 20% of Spain was left 200 years later, which was 630. And that was only Granada. Granada was the only 20% of Spain left. Muslims were everywhere, but they knew they had Granada. And the Crusaders tried to siege Granada, but alhamdulillah, Muslims were very strong and they were united in Granada. And something amazing, the rulers of Granada was Banu al-Ahmar. Ask the Jamaats going into South America and so forth, they see signature called La Ghaliba illallah. That was the signature of the Banu al-Ahmar rulers. And whenever the Crusaders used to attack the Muslims in Granada, there was a ruling family in Morocco called Banu Marine. They used to come and help the Muslims of Granada. And alhamdulillah, this is how when Muslims helped each other, Islam remained in Spain for another 200 years. Until the year 897, when Muslims started fighting with one another again. The details are all available. This is just the crux. And finally, Isabella and Ferdinand, the main Christian regions, the two wedded. And then the Christian world united against the Muslims again. And they defeated and took the Muslims out of Granada. And that's a whole long history. But when they finally took Granada from the Muslims, they wrote a document. There was an agreement between the two with 65 clauses on that document. And this document is up till today preserved in Madrid. It was even signed by the Pope, where they promised the Muslims that you all are handing over these lands to us. But like we lived under you when Christians lived under Muslims, they were very peaceful. They were allowed to practice their religion. We'll allow you the same rights. Your property, your rights, your masajid, all will be preserved and will not be touched by us. These were promises that they made. But really, the promises meant nothing whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever. Not even few months later, and how they treated the Muslims. And this whole document is written. SubhanAllah. How they took area after area. And what they did was they started by banning the Arabic language. And then they started locking the masajid. And then they started, Allahu Akbar, taking Muslim children and putting them into Christian orphanages by force. Then they don't want certain Muslims who are allowed to leave, but then they take away the children, so it becomes very hard to leave. There was a whole agenda. Then the names are changed. Like great people, if you look for their names, the offspring of Hazrat Sa'ad bin Ubadah radiallahu anhu, the rulers of the Banu al-Ahmar, look at the names: Don Fernando, Don Diego. And there was one great ruler who stood up at the time, also from the offspring of Banu Umayyah. His name was Muhammad ibn Umayyah. But what was the name they gave him? And he had to be known by this name. His name was Don Fernando Diego. So this is how, and this is what they did in so many of the countries of the world. You'll find so many people who forgot they were Muslim. This was their strategy. Then they had something else called the torture chambers. The torture chambers of Spain. This was discovered not long ago when subhanallah, what was his name who took Egypt, the famous, in the 1800s? When some Christian soldiers looked for this torture chambers, and they looked and they didn't find it. And afterwards, they went into certain churches. And Napoleon Bonaparte, he sent his soldiers to find out what was this reality of this. And they came into these churches and they put water on the ground, and they found the water seeping through. And they dug through and they found these horrific torture chambers under the ground, what Muslims were put through. There's one amazing incident of a great scholar. His name was Muhammad Akoo. He says, I grew up in Spain speaking the Spanish language. But he says, every day I would go to school, and when I would leave, my father and mother were worried, but I didn't realize why they were worried. Because they weren't allowed to speak Arabic. Otherwise they would be assassinated on the spot, or taken to the torture chambers, or publicly burnt on a spit. So in this, he says, when I come home from school and I share with my parents what I learned from the holy book, he's saying the Bible, I just noticed my father cry and tear, not realizing why. He says, when I was 10 years old, my father shared a secret with me. But before sharing this secret, he said, my son, I want to share something with you, but only if you can bear it. And he says, how do you bear it? Is you can't share it with anyone. And then to test his child, he says, you can't even share it with your mother. And this was a test to say that if he can keep the secret, if he keeps it from his mother, he can keep it from anyone. He left his son to think about it. And when he returned to say, no, I'll preserve your secret, father. He then took him to a place in the house that his son also didn't even know. It was totally hidden, aloof, under the ground. He says it was dusty. It was a small room. And my father switches on a lamp, and he sits there with me. And there's a book between us. And he asks me, what's this book? Behind closed doors. He says, I said, this must be the holy book, the Bible. He says, my son, this is the Quran. This is our book. This is the Quran Kareem. This is our book. So his son is shocked. He says, aren't the people of the Quran the bad people, as we learnt? The Moriskis and the downtrodden and the rebels and the barbarians. And this was what they used to be taught. He says, my son, it's not like that. We are the people who brought civilization to this world. We brought civilization to this country. All these buildings, these masajid that are now churches, are all ours. Even the huge structure and the advancements in these lands are all due to us. We are the Muslims. We are the ones that spoke the Arabic. And then he used to sit with his son every day, and he used to teach him. But all this, they had to attend church. This was part of the strategy and the agenda of the forces of Batil. He says, one day I come home and I don't find my parents there. And in this worry, there's an elderly man who comes there, who I met a few times. And he said to me, remember what your father said when you don't see them at home, that you should go with me. And emotionally he remembered and said, yes. And I go with him. And then I realized my parents were also taken to these torture chambers. And then he was taken via the sea and sent to Morocco. And this is where also he became a great scholar and an author of books and tafsirs. But at that time, there's amazing letters where the Muslims of Spain wrote to Muslim rulers, like the Abbasids had become very weak, they were ruling from Egypt. No one could help them. But the people who tried to help the Muslims of Spain were the Ottomans. Sultan Salim. And then Sultan, the Khalifa, he was then a Khalifa. Sultan Salim became the Khalifa, the first Ottoman Khalifa. He tried to help them. And then Sultan Sulaiman Qanuni, he sent a famous man by the name of Khairuddin Barbarossa, who helped on many occasions. He was the red-bearded, righteous man. But even him, obviously, Western information is to, defame all good Muslims who try to do good things. Like even, they'll say, like the man who invented or found, was the first person to arrive in America, was Columbus. But actually it wasn't. If you look at it, Piri Rais, who was an Ottoman admiral, who actually arrived there 29 years even before Columbus. So here Khairuddin Barbarossa would come and help and rescue. He would take the Muslims out of the torture chambers. He would blindfold them because they're underground for years. Some of them are actually placed in a bending posture. Others were tied and nails were knocked into their coffins until they were to die. Women were put into graves with bones, tied in such a position into a ball position until they would become mad and then die. It was horrendous, despicable, unbelievable, gruesome. And it's all true. He would rescue them, take them out of those. There's a famous book you should read. It's in English, Isabella. It gives some of these recounts. In this Barbarossa used to take them. But now you can't take them in the sun. So you blindfold them because then they would become blind. They haven't seen the sun in ages. And then they would escort them either to Istanbul or to Morocco. And like this carried on. A question comes about, couldn't the Ottomans, like they helped so many countries of the world, couldn't they rescue Muslim Spain? Whenever they tried, the Shia in Iran used to stab them in the back and used to attack them. Whenever they tried. That's why the Ottomans were known not to fight Muslims. But the only people they fought were the Shia in Iran, Ismail Safawi. And when they realized that Ismail Safawi was working with the Portuguese to attack Medina Munawwara and na'udhu billah, to usurp the Mubarak, Allahu Akbar, body of Janabi Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So what the Shia did throughout history, if you look at history, how many a time the greatest of Muslims, Salahuddin, how many times they tried? There was a great Imaduddin Zingi, Nuruddin Zingi's father. Who was he killed? The Shia sent someone to act like his helper and khadim. This man was in his tent striving in the path of Allah, protecting Muslim lands from the Christians. Who killed Imaduddin Zingi? It was the Shia, the Batinites. So what they did was despicable, the way they worked in cahoots with the forces of Batil, always and throughout history. If you can write lists on how many great people who were serving Islam, who were standing up for Islam, but they were killed by the Shia, who would just assassinate them brutally. Anyway, this is how the Ottomans couldn't. There's one or two poems I just wanted to read to you of what happened in these areas in how everything ended. And when Muslims then came out of Spain, there was nothing left. And how they slowly destroyed everything, taking Islam out of it completely. I'll read this poem and I'll translate a few words from it. Subhanallah, he says, this is one of the scholars of Spain who wrote this. He says, Rahimahullah, Abu al-Baqa al-Randi, he says, لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ إِذَا مَا تَمَّ نُقْصَانُ. I won't translate every word, I'll translate some of the verses. لكل شيء إذا ما تم نقصان فلا يغر بطيب العيش إنسان هي الأمور كما شاهدتها دول من سره زمن ساءته أزمان وهذه الدار لا تبقي على أحد ولا يدوم على حال لها شان يمزق الدهر حتما كل سابغة إذا نبت مشرفيات وخرصان أين الملوك ذو التيجان من يمن وأين منهم أكاليل وتيجان وأين ما شاده شداد من إرم وأين ما ساسه في الفرس ساسان وأين ما حازه قارون من ذهب وأين عاد وشداد وقحطان أتى على الكل أمر لا مرد له حتى قضوا فكأن القوم ما كانوا وصار ما كان من ملك ولا ملك كما حكى عن خيال الطيف واسنان. He explains how everything comes to an end. He says, never be beguiled by the life of this world. Today it's yours, tomorrow it is someone else's. Never be happy at someone else's calamity, because what goes around comes around. Then he names the kings, the powerful rulers of the world. Where are they? What happened to their kingdoms? What happened to their position, to their jewels, to their glory? Everything has to come to an end. Only Allah's glory and kingdom never comes to an end. And then he says, any calamity has solace. But what happened to Islam in Spain, nothing can give us solace for that. وَلِلْحَوَادِثِ سُلْوَانٌ يُسَهِّلُهَا. Anything you can find solace in. وَمَا لِمَا حَلَّ بِالْإِسْلَامِ سُلْوَانُ. What happened to the Muslims in Spain, nothing can give us solace. He says, دَهَا الْجَزِيرَةَ أَمْرٌ لَا عَزَاءَ لَهُ. He says, nothing can give us solace in this pain. فَاسْأَلْ بَلَنْسِيَةً مَا شَأْنُ مُرْسِيَةٍ وَأَيْنَ شَاطِبَةٌ وَأَيْنَ جَيَّانُ وَأَيْنَ حِمْصٌ وَمَا تَحْوِيهِ مِن نُزَهٍ وَنَهْرُهَا الْعَذْبُ فَيَّاضٌ وَمَلْآنُ. He says these towns, he names them Valencia, Murcia. What happened? Shatiba, Qurtuba, Jayyan. What happened to all these areas that were the seat of Islamic learning? He says, وَأَيْنَ قُرْطُبَةٌ دَارُ الْعُلُومِ فَكَمْ مِنْ عَالِمٍ قَدْ سَمَا فِيهَا لَهُ شَانُ. He says the Darul Ulum of the world was Qurtuba. What happened to Qurtuba? He says Islam was crying. And who is there to cry for Islam? That these lands just ended like that. حَيْثُ الْمَسَاجِدُ قَدْ صَارَتْ كَنَائِسُ مَا فِيهِنَّ إِلَّا نَوَاقِيسٌ وَصُلْبَانُ. Masajid were transformed into churches. No places of adhan, now it's just barrels and crosses. Hatta al-maharib, the mihrab of the masajid are crying, even though they're inanimate. The manabir are crying, even though they're made of wood and stone. Ya ghafilan, يا غافلا وله في الدهر موعظة إن كنت في سنة فالدهر يقضان وماشيا حرصا يلهيه موطنه أبعد حمص تغر المرء أوطان. He says, oh, one who's negligent of Allah and he's taking pride over the palatial home he lives in and the amazing city he enjoys. He says, nothing lasts forever. He says, after these cities, do you think anything of this world will last forever? He says, you ride your amazing conveyance. He says, what happened to those amazing conveyances? And then he says towards the end, أَعِنْدَكُمْ نَبَأٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ أَنْدَلُسٍ فَقَدْ سَرَى بِحَدِيثِ الْقَوْمِ رُكْبَانُ. Have you heard of Spain? Of Andalus? What happened there? أعندكم نبأ من أهل أندلس فقد سرى بحديث القوم ركبان كم يستغيث بنا المستضعفون وهم أسرى وقتلى فما يهتز إنسان. He says how much they beseeched and begged for help, but they were murdered brutally and there was none to even move and pain. He says, where's these souls who'll stand up for deen and make a difference and bring deen back in their lives? ألا نفوس أبيات لها همم وأين للخير أنصار وأعوان. He says, where are those who will help the khair and help the deen? He says, if you heard and saw those little girls crying, it says you would see an infidel take a little girl and usurp her and violate her and hurt her. And what they did is undescribable. وَلَوْ رَأَيْتَ بُكَاهُمْ عِنْدَ بَيْعِهِمُ لَهَالَكَ الْأَمْرُ وَاسْتَهْوَتْكَ أَحْزَانُ. These beautiful Muslim children were sold. And if you heard them cry, you would shock. يا رب أم وطفل حيل بينهما كما تفرق أرواح وأبدان. A mother sold separately, her daughter, little girl, sold separately. Like how the soul is separated from the body. وطفلة مثل حسن الشمس إذ طلعت كأنما هي ياقوت ومرجان يقودها العلج للمكروه مكرهة والعين باكية والقلب حيران لمثل هذا يذوب القلب من كمد إن كان في القلب إسلام وإيمان. This is a beautiful child, a beautiful girl, equated in beauty even to that of the sun when it appears in the horizon. Like corals and pure pearls was her beauty. A little girl. But the infidel would take her to usurp her and violate her, and everyone's eyes would just be in tears and crying. Such atrocities that if the heart has iman, it would melt instantaneously in grief and sadness. This is what happened to lands of Islam, and this is a reality. It was wiped out totally. But think about it, where Muslims entered, not even 20,000, but with such iman, kicked out 20 million 800 years later. There's so many lessons in history. There's so many lessons that we have to play our part. We have to strive for Allah's deen. We have to spread the truth to humanity. We have to protect our iman, humanity's iman, our children's iman. We can't take pride over the things of this world and the embellishments of this world. Allah Ta'ala save us. Allah Ta'ala accept our discussion. But what's our part? Take out some time for Allah's deen. Unite this ummah of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Spend time in the jamaats. When the brothers are sitting for mashura, sit, think, what's happening? Instead of thinking what this one will say, what that one will say. Sit and make mashura. How can we bring people towards Allah's deen? How can we use this heart and this mind also for Allah's deen? How can we also be accepted for Allah's deen? Our children are going to learn the Quran. You and I should also take out time. Go with your son. And my mother, you go with your daughter. Go to the madrasa. Learn the Quran Sharif. How are we going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In Sahaba's times, it wasn't only children learning the Quran Sharif. Sahaba who embraced Islam, they used to go and learn. Don't feel shy to learn. Make a difference. And then also, let's not delay in bringing unity between people. Make salam to the next. If there's any misunderstanding, apologize. Be the first to apologize. Let's be better people. Let's prepare as though we're going to pass away very soon. Iman and amal can change conditions. And also, let's spread and share Islam with the non-Muslims. And this is my last message. The non-Muslims are waiting for Allah's deen. They also worried about their children with this LGBT and all sorts of filth that they are being bombarded with. What's happening to our children? Do the ta'aleem in the home. But also share this message with our children's parents, our children's friends' parents. Talk to them. Tell them about the beauty of Islam. Invite them to the masjid. Tell him, come see how we pray. Help him remove his shoes. Show him how we make wudu. Let him sit. Let him see. This could save him from hellfire. Let's do as much as we can for the akhirah. Allah give us tawfiq. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa habibina wa muta'ina wa maulana Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله على نيته وسره يا ربي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أيد الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها يا رب العالمين. Oh Allah, help the ummah of our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the four corners of the world. Allah, make us better people, make us true Muslims, make us people of iman, make us people of amal, make us people of yaqeen, make us of those who will make salam first. Make us of those who will unite with one another. Make us of those who look at the good of others. Allah, make us of those who unite and bring peace. Make us of those who you are happy with. Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, preserve the Jamaat striving in your path. And all the efforts of deen, the khanqas, the makatib, the madaris, and all the beautiful works of deen that's taking place. Preserve these Mubarak works, Ya Rabbal Alameen. And oh Allah, this effort of sharing deen with the non-Muslims, Allah, this is a work of your Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and a work of all the Anbiya alayhimus salam salam, that we've totally neglected Allah. Allah, we've not even understood that this is in the Quran Kareem repeatedly, abundantly. Ya Allah, Allah, we've not shared Islam with those who we associate with on a daily basis, those who we interact with. Allah, we know if we want to sell our car, we know how to offer that. If we eat in the restaurant, we're very quick to complain even if the masala wasn't right or the sauce wasn't right. But to explain to that waiter about you, Allah, your oneness, your greatness, your mercy, your kindness, your compassion, Ya Allah, to become a means of that person's salvation from Jahannam, Ya Allah. Allah, we've become so heartless, Ya Allah, that we haven't even the time. We've become so selfish that we haven't even the time to tell one person about you, Allah, and about your Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's beautiful sunnah and way of life, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Help us fulfill this responsibility as well, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Help the ummah of our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout the world, in the four corners of the world. Allah, this life is so short. We can leave this world at any time. Help us prepare for the day that we have to go, and you make it easy for us in the stages of the afterlife, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, we ask you for all good for the entire ummah of our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the four corners of the world. Ya Rabbi salli wa sallim daiman abadan ala habibika khairil khalqi kullihim. Ya Rabbi bil Mustafa balligh maqasidana waghfir lana ma mada ya wasi'al karami wa sallallahu ala an-nabiyyil ummi bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin.